Okay, I'm here now. So people, ready to go?
Yes.
Good, wonderful. So the only trouble is I forget what we talked about last week. I can imagine what we talked about, but I mean, I might just have to repeat it, and that's okay. So we start with our little refuge prayer, shall we?
Yes. Let me just pull that up real quick.
So who are you? I don't know your name. Who are you?
Hi, Venerable Robina. My name's Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, happy to see you, darling. Good.
Yeah, so great to see you. Last week was so wonderful. You gave us so much to think about.
Good, I'm happy. You didn't make a note of what we talked about, summary of it, did you?
Well, I have about 3 pages of notes. I can try.
No, probably was it just the overview of what the mind is and how it's not physical and how it's beginningless and endless and how it's got this potential. We talked about that. Did we begin to discuss the did we distinguish between sensory and mental consciousness? And then we talked about the different characteristics in the mental consciousness, negative, positive, and neutral. We discussed all that.
Did we do the different characteristics? Do you remember?
I think we were discussing the mental consciousness, which is the main one. So we'll summarize everything because it's always good. The Lamas always, traditionally, they would give the first teaching, then they repeat it a second time, slightly less, and then repeat it a third time, even more briefly. So I'll do that anyway, then we'll see where we go with it all, okay? Okay, so people will just offer this little mandala. The center should do that. So Elizabeth, you know how to sing the prayer, or you say it in English? Because Elizabeth, on behalf of the Lama Yeshe House, is offering a mandala. So we visualize the whole universe, offering it as a request for the teaching. So it's auspicious that you lead it, darling.
Okay. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami. So what that is the universe according to Buddha's cosmology. I mean, we didn't know we had Mount Meru in the center, did we? And we didn't know there were 4 continents. That's a different whole view of the universe, right? So then we just imagine offering all the marvelous things. And then now we can do our refuge prayer. Have you got that there, Elizabeth? There we go. Perfect. So this one, I'll explain it. The first 2 lines mean this is for those of us who already identify with being Buddhist. And so it's reiterating our reliance on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the second 2 lines are expressing our, as the Lamas would call it, our motivation. We might call it our purpose, I mean, our reason, our goal. Why are we sitting here together listening to these teachings? Well, this is the most altruistic, most expansive reason, if you like. So I'll say it the first time, I'll say it in English, putting a few extra words in, and then we'll do 2 more times in Tibetan. So what we're saying is, until we are enlightened, we are going to rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, the Dharma, and then the community that we practice with. And then by the virtuous karmic seeds that we plant in our mind from listening to these teachings, may we eventually, no matter how long it takes, become a Buddha. So then we are qualified to benefit beings. That's the kind of the classic presentation. And I'll sing 2 times in Tibetan. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupha shok. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupha shok. Okay. So we'll go over the points, the main points, and then we'll continue to go into detail about this mind of ours. But it's always good I always like to start sometimes reminding us of what the job is of being a Buddhist. We can get very confused, especially if you're Tibetan Buddhist. There's so many things and so many so-called rituals and practices. We don't know where to begin, and we sometimes don't understand where it all fits. So the actual job of being a Buddhist, it's really almost too simple for words, is to change your mind. So why would she do that? Why would we do that? Well, I always like to quote this. Look at the word Buddha, which is the goal. The end result is Buddha. So what do these 2 syllables mean? The etymology of these 2 syllables is really tasty. Bud, or the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye, Sang, implies the utter eradication from one's mind of all delusions, all fear, all ego, all nonsense, all attachment, anger, jealousy, all this stuff that we in our world and feel experientially that are totally at the core of our being. We believe that. We feel this is who I am, you know? So it's kind of shocking to hear the Buddha's saying, this is the job he's done. He says, this is my methodology, and this is, you know, go for it, do it yourself. So the first syllable implies we can get rid of all the rubbish, which is a big surprise to us. The second syllable tells us, and this is the Mahayana component, that we can develop to perfection all the other parts of our mind: love, compassion, wisdom, kindness, joy. These are at the core of our being. This is quite a shocking concept. It's very simple to say it, but it's pretty shocking if we you know, compare with the neuroscientific views, with the psychological views, with the psychiatric views. Very, very, very different. There's no view like that in our world. So of course that's why we call it religion. Oh, it can't be real. But this is psychology. This is Buddha's view of the mind, you know. So okay, that's the first point. So now, if it's true, we can eventually rid the mind of all the rubbish and develop to perfection all the goodness, which is Buddha. It's sort of obvious. It tells us the job, doesn't it? The job, the essential job of being a Buddhist, the actual job, like I said, is to distinguish between the neuroses and the virtues, to lessen the neuroses and grow the virtues. I mean, that's it. That's the actual job of being a Buddhist. And there's a lovely story about Atisha or somebody way back in the 11th century or something like this, some story. When one disciple said, well, you know, I've just done my prostrations. And Atisha said, I think it's Atisha, and forgive me if I'm wrong. He said, oh, that's fine. I'm very happy for you, but I'm glad, I hope you practice Dharma. Oh, he thought, all right. So he did his mandala offerings. Well, I'm very happy you did your mandala offerings. I hope you practice Dharma. And he kept doing like this. So the practice Dharma, quote unquote, in Buddhism is working on your mind, lessening the delusions. First, you have to recognize them. Then you have to distinguish them from the virtues. And this should be the topic of everything we talk about and how many weeks we're going to be talking, because this is the actual job. So, you know, the job starts, the Buddhist job, if you take the Lam Rim, starts with the first stages of practice. You know, it's called the lowest scope of practice, and that's mainly abiding by the laws of karma, which really just means controlling your behavior, which means controlling your body and controlling your speech, living in good ethics, living in vows. This is the very first level of practice. This is the most immediate level. As Lama Zopa says, the very first thing to start doing, starting this second, is stop killing, stealing, lying, bad-mouthing. So why should we do that? This sounds pretty common. This sounds like good ethics, you know, but this is common to everybody. A good Muslim, a good communist, a good Christian would have good ethics. But there's a crucial point here, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I'm saying it here. You know, we should ask Buddha. He's giving us an instruction. He's giving us some recommendation. He's advising us. So we ought to ask him, well, why should I do that? We tend not to ask. We tend just to take it for granted. It's nice to act nicely, but you should ask the logical reason. And this is a hugely important point. I forget if I said this last week, but I'm certainly going to say it now. And this is crucial to understand. It's not criticizing other views. It's just making the distinction, especially between this view, the Buddhist view, and the general view of all the religions, the philosophical views that are religious. I mean, it's all philosophy, isn't it? There's religious philosophy, materialist philosophy, blah, 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 you know. So the religious philosophies that we assume are religious are those that posit a creator. So obviously, if you posit a creator, the creator's the boss by definition, isn't it? And I always quote this, but I asked my Jesuit priest friend, what is it that makes something negative? What is it that determines that something is a sin or a negative action? We could use that word in Buddhism. And he said, it's very clear. It's what a negative action is, what a sin is doing what God said not to do. As they say, going against God's will. Now that makes complete sense if you have faith in a creator. But Buddha is not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. We don't need creating, basically. As His Holiness says, we have the law of karma, which is like self-creation. So there's no place for a creator. Buddha would argue that with that extensively in all the philosophical texts. This is a fundamental where Buddha diverged from the Hindu tradition, even though they have the view of karma, there's still this view of some essential energy they call God that is the source of everything. Buddha fundamentally disagrees with this. This is fundamental difference, fundamental. So then Buddha is not a creator. He is not the boss. He is not a punisher. He is not a rewarder. This is something so important to think about, and we tend not to think about it. When we hear that Buddha says, don't kill and don't steal, it just sounds like Jesus. It sounds like your grandma. We don't question it, but we should understand the logic. So what's Buddha's logic? Well, he's more like a doctor. He's an advisor. If he's not a creator, then who is he? He's like a doctor. He has found from his own experience, and this is the fundamental view of karma, which is what runs our mind, that everything we think and do and say programs our mind, leaves seeds in our mind that if we don't pull them out or do something about them, they will ripen inexorably, inevitably, naturally in the future as our own experiences, which would mean the type of rebirth we get, our tendencies, our experiences at the hands of others, and even the way the environment impacts upon us. This is Buddha's view. So it is like self-creation, as His Holiness said. So then what's Buddha's reason for exhorting us not to kill, just like Jesus? It is not the same as the Christians or the Muslims or the Jews who posit a creator. It's because there's two parts. There's two parts to this. I don't think we talked about this last week. It doesn't matter. It's karma, which is, one topic. It's a topic on its own, and the mind is a topic on its own. But they utterly come together because the mind creates karma. The law of karma is what runs our mind. So, so for the Buddha, a negative action, first of all, the heaviest level of negative actions is an action that harms another. This Jesuit priest friend said there is some aspect of natural law in why killing is wrong, meaning people don't like getting killed, but the main factor that determines that it is a sin is because God said. Now, I'm not criticizing that view. It's just not Buddha's, that's all. But what's interesting, we have that view, this dualistic view of punishment and reward. Even if we're not Christians or Muslims or Jews, we automatically have that view, because this view, Buddha would say, is a fundamental mistaken view. We're not the product of a creator. We don't need creating. He's not being sectarian. But it's a very shocking concept, but it's fundamentally different from the Christian teachings and the Muslim teachings, but equally from the materialist teachings. I mean, if you're a materialist, you believe mommy and daddy made you. So they're the blame, aren't they? They made you, not for Buddha. They give you a body, but they don't give you a mind, baby. So the reason for Buddha to exhort us not to kill is, first, he at the very beginning practice, before we even start to look into our own mind, right at the first level of practice, the first scope of the Lam Rim, I like to call it junior school. He gets us to stop killing, stop stealing, stop cheating on your partner, stop lying. 4 things of the speech, 3 of the body. And you have to ask him why, because those actions, the heaviest ones, are ones that harm others. You could argue the heaviest negative actions are those that harm others. And that's what determines that it's negative, that it harms others, because the action we do is driven by anger, attachment, or you name it. You don't harm out of love and compassion. That's obvious. So the point is this: it is negative because it harms others, but what makes it negative when we do it is that it leaves us because it's driven by aversion, anger, jealousy, depression, attachment. Have a look at the world. So that's what makes it negative. It is negative in general because it harms others, but what makes it negative is the delusion in our mind that drives it. And then Buddha's actual point, and this is the part that we don't think about in our culture, that he exhorts us at this point not to kill, not because it harms others, that defines it, but because he says, honey child, whatever you think, whatever you say, and whatever you do programs your mind with those tendencies. So in other words, every time, it's like, we know this, every time you practice piano, it's hardly rocket science that you're programming your mind with being a musician, and you turn yourself into a brilliant musician after 20 years of practice. No one's surprised by that, but we don't think like that when it comes to emotions. We don't think that what goes on in our mind, and we don't think that even what we do with our body and speech has anything to do with what I become. But this is the point the Buddha's making. This is a starting point of practice. So this is the law of karma, Buddha says. It's a natural law. It's not punishment and reward. Like just the same way that if you go to your doctor and she says, don't smoke, why not, doctor? She doesn't say, because I say so. And if you do smoke, I'll punish you with cancer. We would laugh and we'd think she's an idiot if she said that. But that's our view of religion. That's our view of religion. There's a boss up there who says, don't do this. And if you do it, you're naughty and I'll punish you. I mean, speaking grossly, this is the view of ego that we all have, It's very fascinating just to think about this. It's quite a different psychological model, quite a different philosophical view, that the Buddha is basically saying that whatever we think and do produces the person we become. And if we start to understand this, we take enormous responsibility. It's like if you know that the food you eat turns your body into the body that it becomes. You know that. It's not surprising to us. So no one needs to judge you and say you ate sugar in order to get cancer, in order to get diabetes. The eating of the sugar itself produces diabetes. That's Buddha's point about our mind. Anger itself, killing itself, stealing, harming, lying, bad-mouthing. These turn us into the person we become. And so the basic instructions, the advice that Buddha's giving us, like a good doctor at the beginning, you don't want to suffer in the future, honey? Well, then don't create the cause. Stop killing, stealing, lying. It's very basic. It's very fundamental, but we hear it as punishment and reward. We do that. He doesn't mean it like that. So that's the very first level of practice. You've got to control the servants of your mind. You've got to calm down the body and speech that are driven by anger, resentment, hurt, jealousy, all the dramas. That is why we harm others. Then once we've calmed the body and speech down, we can get to the next level, middle scope of practice, or high school, I like to call it, and which is where we are at, deal with our mind, because that's what drives our behavior. What's in your mind determines what you do with your body and speech. I mean, we sort of think about it and make sense, but we don't really think about it. We don't really analyze, So this is what we've been discussing, the mind that drives what we do with our body and speech. So this is where we're looking at the mental consciousness. And this is Buddha's expertise. There's detailed, extensive and in-depth presentations of what the mind is and how it functions. Both the way the mind functions, the sensory and the mental consciousness, but also the contents of our mind, which is what we've been concentrating on. So here we need, in order to remember this point, the end result, developing our goodness and getting rid of the rubbish. It almost seems too simple to be true. It seems almost simplistic to us. We make it so complicated in modern psychology, So for the Buddha, it's pretty straightforward. Our job, the essential job, when you really start to become a Buddhist, you start to work on your mind using this very specific model of the mind. And we can divide the contents into three categories. There are those states of mind that are I-based, fear-based, totally neurotic, make us unhappy and cause us to harm others. We know them. Attachment, anger, depression, jealousy, low self-esteem, arrogance, pride, you name it. Simple words that normally, if we think of religion, we'd call a sin, the way the Christians would talk. That word, some people translate the Tibetan word as that, but I think it's pretty much, no one likes that word much in Buddhist terms. So they use the term negative action. So these negative states of mind, and don't hear it in a punitive way or in a moralistic way. No, it's very specific. A negative state of mind has got very specific characteristics. And then the second category are the positive states of mind, and they've got particular characteristics as well. And the Buddha's broad view is that the negative ones, if we follow those, they are what cause us suffering, and they are what cause us to do things to harm others, which is then in turn the process that leaves seeds in our mind, imprints in our mind, tendencies in our mind, programs our mind, and we become a person like that. Now and in the future. This is the view of karma, it's a very fascinating view, actually. We create ourselves really from, second by second, Buddha's saying. So, of course, the major stumbling block, so these are the negative states of mind, but the major stumbling block for us in wanting to work on our mind, wanting, as Lama Yeshe puts it, to be our own therapist, to learn to distinguish between, let's say, attachment and love. And let's go into this. It's the hardest job we'll ever do. We have to want to do that, not feel we're being forced to do it, not in a moralistic way. Why would I want to distinguish in my relationship with my boyfriend? Why is it necessary for me to distinguish between attachment for my boyfriend and love for my boyfriend? So attachment is in the negative category and love is in the positive category. They're completely different states of mind. And it's more, this is what we really have to understand about the Buddhist psychological model, the way they describe the characteristics of a virtuous or positive state of mind, and the way they describe the characteristics of a so-called negative or non-virtuous one. It's not moralistic. It's quite, it's quite theoretically quite intellectual. And then we have to use the basic theory to then look into our mind and observe the workings of our mind. It's a difficult job because at the moment our mind is like a big soup, isn't it, of emotions. All the so-called negative ones and the positive ones are mixed together. We can't tell one bit from another because that's not our job. We don't do that. And in our culture, this is whether we talked about this, I don't remember, but part of our problem in the modern culture, because we are so addicted to believing the outside world is the main cause of what goes on in my mind. This is the key thing that makes it so difficult for us. The views we have, the neuroscientific views, the psychological views, the general feeling we have ourselves, is from the time we open our eyes and until the time we go to sleep, the thing that plays the strongest role in our lives is the outside world, isn't it? So if you hear a loud noise, and you get upset, we think the loud noise is the blame for the annoyance. If you see a delicious chocolate cake and you get all excited, then we think the chocolate cake, almost like we blame the chocolate cake for getting all excited. Well, it's the chocolate cake's fault. Look at it. It's sitting on that plate begging me to eat it. What choice do I have? We feel a little bit like victims of the external world. We feel like we're being pulled from pillar to post, because we don't think our mind is the main player. We think the external world is the main thing. And that's what we spend all our day looking at. And then we think, because we believe that there's something out there is the cause of my happiness, so then we will pursue those things, thinking that when I get the cake or get the boyfriend or get the nice new something or other, that will bring me happiness. This is the logic of the world. We don't question that process. And then we try to avoid the ugly things, and we are convinced of why I'm suffering and why I get angry and why I get jealous. So we focus on the external. Now, Buddha doesn't disagree with this. He doesn't disagree that when you eat chocolate cake, it gives you some pleasure, that if your boyfriend punches you in the nose, it causes you some pain. He doesn't argue with this, but it's a more nuanced view. He says you're not seeing the main source of your suffering is not the boyfriend. This sounds pretty shocking to us. The main source of your suffering is in your own mind. It's the anger itself. Whereas we think the anger is the response, and it is the response to the punch, but we think the anger is a reasonable response, and it's not my fault, and I'm allowed to be angry. We think like this. So to really hear the Buddhist view properly really takes a lot of thinking. We can hear it normally as just moralistic and heavy, We've got to really unpack it carefully, because it's initially quite shocking what Buddha's saying. Basically, he's saying the main cause of my suffering is not the boyfriend. The main cause of my happiness is not the cake. These are merely catalysts, such that when I eat the cake, it triggers a happy feeling. When my face meets the punch from the boyfriend, this sounds pretty shocking, that punch is a catalyst that triggers my anger. And that the anger, it sounds so shocking. Of course, the punch does play a role. Your nose is bleeding, But it doesn't follow it should cause anger. There's a good example. I used to study martial arts, and we would have fighting. We'd have sparring, and we were taught, because it's based on the Buddhist teachings, right back at the beginning. The monks in China, back in the 8th century, I think, they're the ones who developed these martial arts, and it was based upon the Bodhisattva view, that, they in order to protect themselves from the thieves and the naughty people, when they were in their caves in the mountains, they developed this physical skills based on compassion to help subdue the naughty people. So I mean, I remember when I learned Kung Fu, the teacher was a Buddhist teacher, and it makes sense if you understand it. And so when we would be sparring and I'd get punched in the nose by my partner, I was supposed to apologize to my partner because I didn't get out of the way in time. So I wasn't angry when I got punched. So this proves a punch cannot necessarily be the cause of anger. This is too shocking for us, though. But there's an ordinary daily example. When I remember sparring and I'd get hurt and kicked, you don't get angry, you stay stable. You take responsibility. That's a really perfect example, but it's too shocking to hear because we are convinced that the main cause of my suffering is the punch and the main cause of my happiness, let's say, is the chocolate cake. I mean, just simple examples. So to really analyze this sounds pretty shocking to us because we believe we're innocent victims. We believe wicked things happen and we're allowed to be depressed and we're allowed to be angry. We're allowed to be jealous. That's how we talk. We even think, I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. That's how we feel. But this is the way of articulating how ego works for the Buddha. That's why we suffer terribly. We don't think, as Lama Zopa put it, this is so shocking. Most people on the planet, he said, he said these words, it's so shocking, it's almost speechless, but analyze it. He said the vast majority of people on the planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. So what does that mean? So what it means is, I know I'm angry. My boyfriend was unkind to me. I know I'm feeling anger and I'm crying. And I tell you about how angry I am. How dare that boyfriend do this and do that to me? So I know I'm angry. So what does it mean I don't realize that plays a role in my life? I know I'm angry, but I believe the boyfriend caused it. It's like the boyfriend injected anger into me. So we see this anger as some kind of reasonable response that I'm allowed to have because look at what the boyfriend did. So we don't think I'm suffering because I'm angry. That's what Lama Zopa means. We interpret the anger as a natural response and the boyfriend is the cause. I mean, analyze this, and this is how we see the world. Monkeys and dogs as well. It's primordially deep. So it's not that the words are easy, but begin to understand that your anger is the main cause of the suffering. The depression is the main cause of your suffering, not the event that triggered it. That the attachment is the main cause of your suffering, or what we think of as our happiness. I mean, it's not our happiness at all, but the cake is not the main cause. So this is kind of intense concept. The words aren't complicated, but to really hear this is a revelation. And when we can hear these words, then we can practice. And that's why I always like to use examples of my friends in prison. Since the mid-90s, working especially for those first 15 years when I ran Liberation Prison Project. I don't run it now. I gave it up 12 years ago, but I still know some people in prison, friends in prison. That's why I always use examples of my friends in prison, especially some of them are really good practitioners who know, this is the point in Buddhism, if you can change something, please change it, no problem. But the point is, what if you can't? That's where usually we become paralyzed, So my friends in prison know they can't get out of prison. They don't have a key. They can attempt to get out of prison, having lawyers, and it could take years, but they can't choose to walk out of that prison that day. So what choice do they have to work on their mind? And that's why I always quote this woman I know, a woman in Ireland now. She's out of prison, American. This is back in the 1970s. She was hitching in Florida. I always tell this story. Her name is Sunny. She wrote her memoir. They're going to make a movie about her life. She was this nice hippie mum. She had a couple of kids and a hippie husband, and they're hitching in Florida. And they get picked up by two guys, something like this. And then they get stopped by the police. And the two guys kill the police and blame the hippies. So it's a shocking scenario. You can't imagine the suffering of this, being accused of murdering 2 policemen when you're completely innocent. So they're both on death row. After a few years, she was there for 17 years. After a few years, the husband got executed. Can you imagine? He got executed. She went to the execution. She was also in prison, and his head burst into flames. It's like you can't imagine the nightmare, Her children, she gave her children to her grandparent, her own parents. At least they had a loving family. But then the parents got killed in a car accident, both of them. So the kids were given to the state. It's almost like you couldn't imagine a more nightmarish scenario, one after another. She was in solitary for year upon year upon year. So you can imagine the normal response is to go completely out of your brain. You can't even bear the pain of this. Is almost too hard to even bear, to even think about it, And she was such an amazing woman. She's not a Buddhist. But she seemed to have, for me, some incredible ability. She said many things she said. But she said, first of all, one thing she said was, at some point, I finally realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. And this is like the most classic example of this, such a dramatic example of this is the essence of the Buddhist approach. This is the essence, the actual essence of Buddha's approach. And of course, the Buddha's view about the mind is far more amazing and more vast and more powerful and more astonishing than that we could actually rid the mind completely of all these delusions and completely become a Buddha. It's like science fiction almost for us if we compare with neuroscience. But this is the Buddha's point. Anger and attachment and jealousy and ego grasping are not intrinsic. They're not at the core of our being. So the job of being a Buddhist is to identify them and learn to lessen them and eventually rid the mind completely and to grow the goodness to perfection. So that means that's the job to be done. So she's not a Buddhist, but that's exactly what she was doing. She said, I knew I had a choice. This is so incredible, because if we look into our lives, the suffering of most of us is because we don't think we have a choice. We think we are set in stone. We think if a bad thing happens, I have no choice but to be miserable. If a good thing happens, I have no choice but to be happy. So we feel like we're being pulled from pillar to post, don't we? That's what a victim is. I'm not being rude. This is why we suffer. This is why we suffer. So this is why if we try to look into our lives and look at the difficult situations, we've all got difficult situations. Since we're born, we've come up upon people who are mean to us. We come upon situations that are awful, and we sometimes get completely paralyzed. So the key thing to realize is, it seems too brutal. It seems too brutal. That whether it's with your boss, with a partner, with your sister, we've really only got 2 choices. And this is what Sunny was forced. Her back was against the wall. She didn't have the luxury of thinking she was free. She was absolutely locked into this environment. She said, I knew I had a choice. She couldn't change the outside. This was an absolute. She eventually got out. She never stopped working on her freedom. But she said, I knew I could choose to change the way. I'm using words now. To change, basically what she was doing, working on your mind means learning to identify the negative, unhappy, deluded, neurotic, ridiculous response to something. Anger, despair, jealousy, resentment. And these, relatively speaking, are reasonable. But the point is that Buddha's making, when we analyze the mind, and Sally didn't do this, she just had this incredible ability. She knew she had a choice to change the way she saw things. So essentially, she even said one time, I realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I am not a prisoner. I am a monk. I am not in prison. I am in a cave. Now, if you listen to Lama Zopa's advice, there's a book that's come out now, and I really recommend you get it. You've got to go. It's got its own website. It's a fundraiser for the prison project. Rinpoche asked me to put together all his hundreds of letters into a book, which we've done. And Lama Zopa named it How to Enjoy, what is it? How to Enjoy, what is it? I always forget the title. It's so long. How to enjoy oh, I have to look it up. I'm sorry. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend you get it. You go to the website, you can just offer, you just donate. You can offer $1,000 for a book, or you can offer $1. You'll get a book. Let me just see the title. I keep forgetting it. No, this is not it. Oh, no, it's called Enjoy Life. Enjoy. There it is. Enjoy life liberated from the inner prison so that the outer prison doesn't become the real prison. This is his entire title. It's a brilliant, amazing book of advice, intense, totally on the spot. What I'm talking here, totally about changing your mind, talking to these prisoners. I mean, he wrote so many letters. They wrote to him first and he'd write back. One of the guys in this book, like a third of the book is his letter. Rinpoche wrote a 45-page typed letter to this fellow, incredible teachings on emptiness, incredible teachings on attachment, so direct, so personal, unbelievable. And as Venerable Holly said, his attendant who does his letters, at any given time, he's got 2,000 letters in a folder. And he might spend weeks on one person. He's amazing. So this advice is so incredible. It's so direct, because he's dealing with these people living in these nightmarish environments that they cannot get out of. So this is the point for us, our daily lives, these two options. We really, when it comes down to it, we've got two options. In any situation that is not good, when the bad thing happens, when attachment doesn't get what it wants, when the ugly sound, the horrible food, the pain in the knee, your husband abusing you, whatever it might be, and I'm not exaggerating, you listen to this. What are our options? There are precisely two. One, if you feel you can't bear it, then you kindly leave. Leave your husband. Stop seeing your mother. Leave your sister. Leave that job. But that already we go, no, not possible. I couldn't do that. No, I'd never get another job. No, I couldn't leave my mother. No, she'll get upset. But then you say to the person, okay, then if you can't leave the job, if you can't leave your mummy, then you've got to change your mind. You've got to stop being angry, stop being jealous, stop being resentful. No, can't do that. Not possible. My mother's a creep. You can't imagine. So we are paralyzed. We don't believe we can change the situation. You might as well be in prison. We might as well be in prison because we really believe we have no choice. This is the nightmare of ordinary people's lives. Honestly, we really believe. No, I can't change that relationship. No, I can't leave the husband. No, I can't leave the family. No, I can't leave my mum. No, she'll feel bad. I can't do that. No. So if you can't do that, if you decide I will not leave, then what is your only option? Change your mind, reinterpret the situation, find something good about it. And that's exactly what Sunny did. I mean, for me, it's such an outrageous example. I can never get over it, So she worked on her mind. She became less angry, less neurotic, less crazy. And she continued because her mind wasn't because she wasn't out of her brain, she never stopped working on her freedom. She did yoga. She wasn't a Buddhist or anything. So she remained, in other words, what was the result of this? What's the point of all this? It's not moralistic. It's very simple. She became a happy, empathetic human being. This is the point. She didn't feel like a victim. This is so shocking because her example is so extreme, and we're not even in prison, but we might as well be, because we don't ever get to the point where we choose. You're angry, and your boss might be a creep. Your husband might be a pain in the bum, as we say in Australia. He might be, no argument. But we're so overwhelmed by duty and what we think other people expect us to do. We don't have any confidence in our own power to make choices. So we just stay there and suffer and continue to blame and go mad, basically. This is life, this is ordinary life. So what we're discussing here is pretty intense. But the reason to do this is so that you can become happy and then become useful to others. This is the essence of Buddhist practice. This is the essence of Buddhist practice. And of course, it's the hardest job we'll ever do. But we do it every day. You know, you have a phone call with your sister and she gets you annoyed. And then but you consciously decide you won't say a word. You just changed your mind. You just did the job. We do it all the time, but we don't notice. You know, you wanted chocolate cake at the restaurant and you order chocolate cake. Sorry, we don't have any chocolate cake. Well, if you're really attached to chocolate cake, you'll get angry. I want chocolate cake. No. You accept the carrot cake. You changed your mind. That's what we're talking about. Changing your interpretation of chocolate cake and deciding that carrot cake is cool. Changing your interpretation of your sister and recognizing that she's just a neurotic lady, like we all are, join the universe, and you're going to forgive her. You just changed your mind. We do it all the time, but we don't join the dots. And it's not Buddhist uniquely. Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He's not a creator, but it's his expertise, I tell you. The techniques in Buddhism enable us to do this. And that's why we need to study the Buddhist view of the mind, because it's such a specific model, you know, making the utter distinction between the neurotic states and the virtuous ones. It's not a moralistic one. It's a technical thing to learn. And then you slowly use that model and you use it to see your own mind, and you start to recognize the angry thoughts, the jealous thoughts, the attached thoughts, the depressed thoughts, because they're all rooted in being thoughts, deeper down, you know. Any questions, people, before I continue? Any questions? Anything at all on what I've said so far? Who are you with there, Maddie? Who's your friend there? Who is that?
And this is my friend Lou.
I'm Lou.
Hello, Lou. Happy to see
Hi.
you. Happy to see you.
I'm happy to be here.
Good. Anybody got any questions? You got any questions, Maddie? You're always good for the questions.
Oh, do I have any questions? I can come up with a question if nobody has any questions.
If nobody, it doesn't matter. If you have, you got, you know, usually you ask good questions.
Let me think.
You don't have to. Don't worry. Just think about it.
I don't have any questions at this
Okay,
moment.
no worries.
I
So
had a
anyway,
question, Venerable Robina. This is
please go.
Elizabeth.
Good, Elizabeth. Talk to me.
I think you've explained this before, but I'm just trying to remember. So why do you call middle scope high school?
Well, it's just my kind of, you know, okay, this whole Lam Rim, as you know, is structured. It's taken, a teacher in the 11th century wrote this little book called Light That Guides You on Your Way. And what he did was, when he got to Tibet, I think, you know, Buddhism was really flourishing in Tibet, especially Vajrayana Buddhism. But I think he felt that there was no coherent view of where everything fitted. So he took all the major, from the vast body of the philosophical and metaphysical and psychological texts, he took the essential points and he presented them in an orderly way, according to the psychological capacity of a disciple, which is like any body of knowledge, isn't it? So, you know, as we know very well, Tsongkhapa, when he took this text in the 14th century and he presented it, he called it, maybe he didn't invent that term, but he called it the Lam Rim, this gradual path. Well, first of all, what does gradual path mean? It's a kind of a nice term. We'd call it, in our culture, we'd call it a course, wouldn't we? A course in music is a gradual path. A course in math, a course in science, you know, IT, whether it's a 1-year course or a 20-year course, it's a course. Well, that's the literal meaning of the word Lam Rim. Can you get that so far? So if you recognize that, then, you know, and then as Lama Zopa, respecting the lineage, would politely call this first scope of practice, that's what they call it, the first level of teachings is according to the scope, the capacity of a disciple. So then Lama Zopa would call it the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, that's quite a mouthful. I would call that junior school. It's just because it's a term we recognize. When you hear teachings and practices suitable to a disciple of the least capability, I mean, we can hear it, but it's so abstract, we don't quite get the point. Then I just casually, I mean, it's very cliched, say, well, why not call it junior school? I mean, we literally get the meaning, we understand junior school comes before the middle scope, and that's the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. And that's the wisdom wing. That's the Hinayana part of the path. And now you've got the Mahayana component, which is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the greatest capability, and why not call it university? And then you've got Tantra, and why not call that postgraduate? It just seems to me, it's a cliche, but I find it very manageable. We get those terms. It implies something immediately to us, and it absolutely implies levels of capacity. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, and I really like, I did not understand before that the scope is the capacity of the disciple.
That's right, precisely, exactly right, exactly. That's the way Lama Zopa spells it out. The lowest scope, as they call it, he doesn't call it that. He says it's the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. And that's karma. That's just control your body, honey, and control your speech. Hardly even need to look at your mind yet. Just control the servants of your mind and harness your body and speech. Live in good ethics, live in vows, do purification every day. That's mostly about your body and speech. Then now, having calmed down the servants of your crazy delusions, because what drives your angry speech, I mean, what drives crazy speech and what drives actions of the body that harm others is obviously anger and attachment. But Buddha doesn't get us to work on that first. This is the Lam Rim. Control the servants of your mind first. That's what living in ethics means, living in vows and purification every day. And this is a stupendous practice. Now we're qualified to start to look into the mind, which is what drives the actions of our body and speech. And this is where we really become Buddhist. This is where we home in on the actual job of looking at our mind. I mean, if our body and speech are so berserk, you can't see the mind that drives it. You understand what I'm saying? You're just so involved in your story and you're punching and kicking. You can't do it. So you've got to harness your body and speech first. Then you can start becoming your own therapist and unpack and unravel your mind. And this is where, in the middle scope, where you learn the model of the mind, you learn all about the mind and all the mental factors and what's going on. And that's the basis of your practice there. And then, of course, the essence of all that is learning to see how attachment is the main cause of our problem. And then that's the wisdom wing. And if you graduate there, that means you're on the Hinayana path. You now add to this practice, you get renunciation of suffering and its causes. You would now get some single-pointed concentration, and you would now practice meditating on emptiness, and you would realize emptiness, and eventually you'd achieve your own nirvana, and then you're out of here. You don't come back. You graduate at high school. You graduate at the middle scope. But if you're on the Mahayana path, you could do all the same work, but you don't not come back. You keep moving, and now you go to the compassion wing where you start to cultivate bodhicitta. Do you understand? Helpful?
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Thank
Good,
you.
good, darling, good. So psychologically, these are levels. We don't see it initially because the way they present it is very down to earth, and they don't give us the big picture in the beginning. You've got to gradually get the big picture yourself from studying it for quite a while. It takes time, you know. So when you get the essence of it, it's quite helpful for us. We get some bit of encouragement. Yeah. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. What other questions, sweethearts? Any questions? Any points to bring up?
I have
Yes,
one
Lou.
question.
Yes, Lou. Absolutely.
I think he has a question.
Good. Yes, Lou.
How do you help people with their attachments?
It's a good point, Lou. The simplest answer, and it's really sort of obvious, is that the more you understand your own attachment, even if it might not be as severe as somebody else's, the Buddha would say we've all got attachment to some degree for something or other. But the more you understand how that works in your mind, then you'll have a wisdom to know how to interpret the other person. But it doesn't. But then, of course, that means you also got to add compassion to it, because the fact of the matter is, if you can understand a person, let's say who's an alcoholic or something, you might see very clearly what the problem is. But if they can't see it themselves, if they don't own and recognize their own suffering, there's nothing you can do but love them. Just love them and not be impatient and not give them lectures, because you know yourself. if we're not interested in what somebody else's opinion is. Everybody runs around trying to tell us what to do. There's nothing more infuriating. So first of all, you've got to have the wisdom to know your own mind. Then you can see the problem in the other person and you know the solution, but they have to be ready to hear it, Lou. So sometimes we just have to love the person for who they are and mind our own business. Watch them like a hawk, and maybe one day there'll be an opportunity because their mind will be open to be helped. But they have to want to be helped. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Ven
Lou.
Robina.
And we need to really be patient, because sometimes we can see the problem so easily in somebody else and they can't see it themselves, and we get very mad at them. It's a bit like our mum. Our mum's always telling us off and telling us this and telling us that, oh, because I love you. But I mean, we've got to learn ourselves sometimes. We've got to make our mistakes sometimes. So to love the other person for who they are and watch them like a hawk, and really not to try to criticize them, but one day maybe they'll be open to advice, and then you can help them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Lou, thank you. That's a really good point. Thank you. What else, people?
I have one question.
Good.
And this might seem like it's kind of not a necessary question. It's very simple,
Okay.
but I feel like
David.
it might help me with something I've just been kind of working through my
Good.
mind.
Good.
Last time you had talked about how there's 84,000 mental states.
Oh, that's the negative ones. That's how the Buddha says.
Oh, okay.
I have to tell you, David, negative ones, neurotic ones, and then there are 84,000 antidotes to them. But I have to tell you this, it's rather funny, David. Every time I ask the Geshes, what texts will I find these 84,000 in? They never know. So there's always this tradition that Buddha says there are 84,000 problems. And even they would argue, because of the three poisons, they all come down to the three. They're subsumed to these three. And they all say there's 21,000 are rooted in attachment, 21,000 rooted in ego grasping, and 21,000 rooted in anger. And then the fourth 21,000 are rooted in all three. But you never find the text where that map of the mind is. So never mind. So anyway, ask your question.
You answered it.
Oh, okay, good.
Yep. I just needed to know that there were 84,000
antidotes. Oh, yeah, that's the man. If there weren't, you might as well give up now. If there weren't, you might as well give up now. Yeah. That's the key point. The Buddhist analysis of the mind is very precise. You see the problem and then there's a solution. That's very much the approach they take. And it's quite a precise approach. The more clearly you can identify the problem, the more easily you can apply the antidote to fix the problem. Yeah, there are absolutely the 84,000 antidotes. Otherwise, my God, what a disaster.
Right, great.
Thank you. Good questions. Thank you very much. What else, people? Any other questions? Well, we should continue then. Did we go into detail about the difference between attachment and love? Because that's a really powerful one. We need to do this. Well, let's do that anyway. If we did it already, we'll do it again. This is the big problem. I mean, it's easy to talk about how there's deluded, neurotic, negative states of mind and positive, appropriate, beneficial states of mind. Those words are pretty clear. But it's hard to identify the difference, which is the crucial job to be done, because they're mixed together like a big soup. Because we have an assumption that the negative ones are just a normal part of a normal person. So therefore we don't question them. We know they cause pain. And then when they're really bad, we rush off to a therapist and hope that all the pain will go away. But we don't seem to really learn to distinguish. So if you take attachment and love, they're like, there's a lovely saying, we say in English in Australia, they're like chalk and cheese. They can look the same, but they're completely different. And this is really a good example of the absolutely clear distinction between the neurotic states of mind and the positive ones. Okay, so now, if we take it's a really helpful, when we take the compassion wing, we haven't discussed it, but let's look at it now. And we start to want to develop love, compassion, great compassion, then culminates in this amazing attitude called Bodhichitta, which is this kind of primordial shift in the mind where you then finally, you only want to help others. It's almost like the mind of a saint, it's so amazing. This is the Bodhisattva path. So the very first practice, and there's different sets of practices that help us develop this bodhicitta. But in all the cases, the first practice, the foundation practice, is the practice called equanimity. So what this is once you've got it, it's all these terms are always defined very precisely. So this equanimity is when you've got it. It's this heartfelt recognition that a person we would call a friend, a person we call an enemy, and a person we call a stranger. Hello, come in. Hello. I'm in this funny place. I have to go check the door. I'm so sorry. Please wait. Please forgive. So, okay, so the fundamental difference between these two is so enormous that it's almost it's shocking to even hear it when we look at the difference between these three categories. So what is it? What is the attitude? I didn't finish what equanimity was. I'll go back. But what is the attitude we have towards a friend? A friend, in this analysis, a friend is a person we have attachment for. And then an enemy is a person we have aversion for. And a stranger is a person we don't care about. If you think about it very simply. So at the moment, the way we all are with the three poisons, and the three poisons are attachment, aversion, and then the root delusion, which is ego grasping, and indifference is a consequence of that. So then the whole world, you think about it, we divide it into these three categories. Think about it. There's no fourth category. Think about it. There are those we're attached to, our beloveds. There are those we have aversion for. You mightn't use the term enemy, but it's a useful term for the object of your aversion or anger. And then you have a person who is a stranger. So what is it that motivates these? And I'll get to then the definition of equanimity. At the moment, the person whom we have attachment for, who appears beautiful to us, that we do have love and compassion, but only for that category. Think about it. Naturally, the person we're attached to, like our baby, our beautiful boyfriend, our friends, in general, we sometimes can get angry with them, but in general, we label them friend. They're in the friend category. And that means we have attachment for them. And the crucial point is, as long as they keep doing what my attachment wants, as long as they fulfill my needs. This sounds kind of brutal, but analyze our lives. When they continue to fulfill my attachment's needs, then what will I have for them? Love. So what's love? The definition of love is under the positive heading, and it's the basic attitude of wanting that person to be happy. May you be happy. That's love. It's the meaning of love. So some people, we have incredible love. We'll give our lives for them, like our children or something, won't we? But it's absolutely contingent for most people on this planet. That love is contingent upon attachment, and that they are fulfilling my attachment's needs, which means we have to distinguish between attachment and love. They are fundamentally different states of mind, but because they come together, and we only love those we're attached to, and we usually only are attached to those we love, we literally conflate them. So it's a huge job to see the difference, you know? So when the friend stops doing what my attachment wants, what happens? They move into the enemy category. The boyfriend who leaves you for somebody else, the person who's mean to you, the boss who fires you, the people who criticize you, everybody in their lives from the time we're born, we've got some people we adore who fulfill our needs, and then there are some people who don't, who actively do things to not fulfill our needs, and often they can move from the friend category into the enemy category. We know this. So what's the third category? Well, the person in the friend category, the one we have attachment for, as long as they fulfill my attachment's needs, they can remain a friend. And then I'll have love and compassion for them. Now, if there's a person who doesn't fulfill my needs, and it doesn't always have to have been a previous friend, not in this life, it can be a person who's got the politics you don't like, a person who's just plain ugly, a person who's mean to you, the boss who fires you, whatever you think, a person who actively doesn't fulfill your attachment's needs, who disagrees with your views, who's got different views, different politics, different sports team. We can call that person an enemy. A person who's the object of our aversion, even our anger. Look at the world, please. Now, what's a stranger? That's necessarily the object of an aspect of ego grasping. It's called indifference. You couldn't care less about them. Why? Because they've neither helped me nor harmed me. So how do I feel about them? I couldn't care less. And that's 99.99% of the universe. Think about it. And we all take this for granted. It's just in the normal world. Why? Because we've all got the three poisons. We're all driven by ego grasping, which then gives rise to attachment to get what ego grasping wants, which then gives rise to aversion when it doesn't get what it wants. We all have the three poisons. This is what the Buddha's fundamental analysis, not just of humans, of monkeys and dogs and ants as well. It's a very fascinating model. Buddha's view of the mind refers to all living beings. Maddie's got a question. Good, darling.
Yes, I was that taking for granted. I feel like that's very much like it's very reactive. It makes the
right,
ego
automatic, isn't it?
And it really brings the ego grasping into life. And you see that taking for granted. It really it's like
Exactly.
pow, you can see it, and then reacting with not necessarily reacting, but when you flip it and you act with love, it's very proactive.
That's exactly right. Exactly, Maddie. That's right. So this practice in the compassion wing, where we're looking at the three poisons in relation in particular to other sentient beings, in the earlier stages of practice, in the middle scope or high school, we're looking at the three poisons in relation to everything in general that triggers them in our mind so that we can begin to subdue these three poisons. Calm our attachment down. Don't believe in what we're seeing. Calm the anger down. This is a huge job. This is the major job, So then we can get to the compassion wing and start to see how that divides the universe into these three categories. I mean, I always use the example. It's a funny story, but it's such a good example and how we take it all for granted. One day looking in my New York Times, I always tell this story, it's years ago, and I suddenly see in the bottom right-hand corner, I see out the corner of my eye, there's a heading on the homepage, 350 people die in ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, Tasmania is Australian. I mean, I'm an American person now. I'm a citizen. But I'm, still in my heart, I'm Australian, I suppose. I sound like an Australian. And so Tasmania is my people. It's Australians. It's called Friends. It's my people. They're Australians. So I went, oh, no. And I looked at the story, and then I realized it didn't say Tasmania. It said Tanzania. And I went, oh, it's okay. Because why? Because they're strangers. Of course, I caught myself, read the story, had compassion, but automatically they weren't my people. It was Tanzania's. So I had to think, where's Tanzania? Who are these people? Of course, it's natural for us. Like I said, we take it for granted. We're programmed in these three, it's very fascinating. So this is quite shocking to think that you mean Buddha's suggesting that we can try and have love and compassion for everybody. I mean, it sounds like outrageous, but that's the goal. That's on the Mahayana path. That's the outrageous goal. So there's masses of unpacking to do. There's masses of analysis and observing these default assumptions we have. I mean, basically, these delusions are default assumptions. We fall into the trap. I mean, yourself, it's so automatic. If you're on a plane for a few hours, when I was traveling all the time on airplanes, especially long flights, and I'm talking about 10, 15 hours, you can't help but look around. You go back and forth to the toilet. You see different people in the different seats. Within a few hours, you think about this. You're at a party, at work, everywhere. Before you know it, you've already divided the people into friends, enemies, and strangers. Think about it. You go to a party, and a day later, you remember one person, two people, the person you hated and your friend. The rest are these strangers who disappear into space in your mind because they don't affect your life. Most people, the vast majority of beings on this planet are strangers to us. So we care we don't care about the vast majority. And of course, it sounds initially exhausting. You mean I've got to love everybody? Well, Buddha says, yes, baby, it's possible. Because what's holding you back from doing it is the presence in your mind of ego grasping, attachment, and aversion. And so even, I remember when I first read about these teachings and first heard the teachings, that this talk about the level of compassion that they'd say that we're capable of, it just seemed outrageously ridiculous. It seemed like we're all going to become saints. I thought, this is too much. I can't handle it. It was too difficult. But I remembered His Holiness. It was so powerful. He said, if you want to help others, practice compassion. If you want to help yourself, practice compassion. It suddenly brought it down to earth. And that's the point that we often skip over, even in the very beginning of the teachings when we start to learn about karma. The reason Buddha exhorts us, the first reason Buddha exhorts us to not kill, steal, lie, etc., he calls those actions negative because they harm others. But the reason at this first stage of practice he exhorts us not to do the actions is because he says, guess what, honey? They will harm you. That your negative tendencies, your killing, your stealing, your lying, your anger, your jealousy, they harm you. So the first reason we have to cultivate is, that's what they mean by renunciation. We want to, it's like compassion for yourself. You've got to be sick of the suffering that you cause yourself by being angry, resentful, neurotic, depressed, and jealous. It's like compassion for yourself. But we skip over that. We think that sounds selfish. We've missed the point completely. Even this talk, about recognizing the power, the benefit to yourself of cultivating compassion. Don't misunderstand it. It's not meant to be self-serving. It's meant to see that when your mind is more loving, when your mind is more compassionate, who do you think first and foremost is the beneficiary of that? You. And that's where we have to start to see that what goes on in our mind plays the main role in our life. When we can start to see the pain that anger and depression and jealousy and despair causes us, and the main benefit to us of having a peaceful mind, a loving mind, a compassionate mind. That's why we've got to start practicing on our mind first, which is we are the beneficiaries. The first level of practice is we are the beneficiaries, abiding by the laws of karma and working on our minds. You've got to see this. You can't just skim over it and say, no, that sounds selfish. We'll miss it completely. Then we will have a valid basis for going to the compassion wing and developing love and compassion for others, because we realize we are all in the same boat. That's my point to Lou. If Lou can see his own mind, Buddha said we're all junkies to some degree. We're all attached. We're all bipolar. We're all schizophrenic. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. These are the modern terms for states of mind that Buddha's been looking at for 2,500 years. He calls them simple words, that's all. We've all got delusions of some description or another. So when we can see our suffering, then it is easy to see the suffering of another and why they end up harming other people. You got this alcoholic brother, let's say. When you can see that his attachment is causing him unbelievable pain, then you can see why he harms others, So, but we tend to just get angry. Look at how he harms everybody. Look at him, this old drunk. We've got to see how it's harming himself first. And we can't see that until we see our own junk and have compassion for ourselves. This is a hugely important point. You can't just skip over it. So the difference between attachment and love, let's get back to that. So this is where, if we can really learn the function in this Buddhist model of the mind, the clear function of the neurotic states of mind. They're very specific. They've got two main functions. One is and this is a term used, they are disturbing emotions. This should be so evident. It ought to be enough for us to want to give them up. Check this. Check the last time you were anxious, depressed, out of control, jealous, arrogant, low self-esteem. Check the last time you were clearly disturbed. It's deeply painful. And this is the point when Lama Zopa said that most people on the planet don't realize that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all. We know we're depressed or jealous or distressed, but we think that caused it. He caused it. She caused it. Then we sort of get ourselves off the hook. But if we can just see the pain, the disturbing character of these states of mind, then that should be enough for us to want to get rid of them. But the subtler function of these disturbing emotions, this is conveyed by the word delusion, and I use it a lot, you must notice. This is a very powerful thing to understand. This is the really specific function of all the disturbing emotions that is why they are so disturbing, why they cause us suffering. So what is a delusion? This is a very good word in English. I notice when I teach in other languages, well, I don't teach in other languages, I can only speak Australian, but people translate for me, you know? So in Italian, in Spanish, in French, this word delusion is translated, but it's very arcane. They don't use it. But in English, it's brilliant. You know yourself, in psychology, if you're accused of being delusional, look at the literal meaning. It means you're not in touch with reality. Well, this is exactly what Buddha is saying to us about these disturbing emotions. And this is when we can understand this about attachment, anger, jealousy, and etc., then we understand why they cause us such pain, and then we understand how we can change them. So another term in Buddhist psychology for delusion is misconception. I mean, that sounds hilarious. So anger is a misconception. What are you talking about? Anger is an emotion, we'll say. And this is the point that makes it quite difficult for us. In our culture, and we've talked about this, we only notice our emotions when the body experiences something. So when you're shaking with anger, then you realize you're angry. Now, the person who gets depressed, because it's more internalized, they only notice they're depressed when they can't get out of bed one morning because they're inert with despair. In other words, we don't notice what's going on in our mind until it becomes physical. And because we're so addicted to our bodies, we don't pay attention. I mean, look at us with our approach to therapy. You know, if I've got a relationship with my boyfriend, Lou, let's say, and we're in love with each other, we look happy, right? And then Maddie says, well, you know, Robina, you could start to learn to meditate. And I will laugh at her. I'll say, why should I? I'm happy. Well, Buddha's saying, that's the time to start, baby, because you're not looking at your mind, because the delusion you're caught up in right now, which is like a honey-covered razor blade, is this berserk attachment that causes me, and this is where we have to distinguish between love and attachment now. So let's just say Lou is my object. Sorry to embarrass you, Lou, but you're my boyfriend, okay? So let's say I've got attachment for Lou, which is what then? Attachment is the voice of ego. It's emotional hunger. It's coming from a very neurotic place in here. It's coming from a feeling of not being enough. So then I'm always hungry for something. I'm looking for the boy out there. Then my attachment gloms onto Lou. And then what the attachment will do is exaggerate Lou's deliciousness, completely blind me to anything else about him. I will over-exaggerate Lou's function in making me happy. I will be manipulative Lou. I'll try and control Lou because of attachment. He will look divine. I will believe he's the cause of all my happiness, and I will expect him. This is the monstrous part of attachment. It's like this vampire in me. It will demand that he do exactly what my attachment wants, and I will expect that of him. We don't articulate it like this. Now, what's my saving grace in this relationship? I've got love for Lou as well. That's a virtue. So what's love? Love is a completely different state of mind. Attachment is I-based, fear-based, needy, manipulative, hungry, dependent, possessive, a control freak. It's a nightmare attachment. But what saves the day, and ironically makes it harder for me to see my attachment, is because I have genuine love for Lou. So what's love? That's under the positive heading. That's a reasonable state of mind because it sees Lou for who he is. It wants Lou to be happy. It delights in his happiness. It's altruistic. It's not based on me. Attachment is based on me, and love is based on the connectedness between us. So love is a valid state of mind. It's a virtuous state of mind. It's a reasonable state of mind. But the trouble is we only have love for those we're attached to. And so the attachment pollutes the love, drags it down. And if my attachment is so enormous, then we can see it with our mums, our poor old mums who are so many, when they're really full of attachment, every time we do something they don't approve of, oh, you don't love me, you don't come and see me enough, you're doing what I don't want to do. They take it all personally. Attachment takes everything personally. Attachment causes me to see Lou through the lenses of only my needs. It's so neurotic. And if we really look at it deeply, not to be critical of ourselves, it's the mind of a junkie. It happens to be that in our culture, though, we only think you're a junkie when you're attached to alcohol, when you're attached to sex for 27 girls a day, when you're attached to heroin. But the Buddha says, honey, we've all got junkie mind. It's a question of degree and a question of the object. It's a much more subtle, more nuanced look at the human mind, and we're driven by this attachment. From the point of view of the Four Noble Truths at this level of practice, this is the main cause of our suffering. So what happens when and they're all unspoken, I don't articulate it like this, we don't even see this, we take it for granted, and I'm driven by this emotional need, and so then I manipulate Lou to do everything I want, and then when he doesn't do what I want, what do? I get angry. How dare you do that to me? You get offended, upset, you criticize, you blame. Look at relationships. I think it's a miracle we don't all kill each other. So attachment is a demented state of mind. And the thing is, you can see some people with the world would call them psychotic because they only have attachment and not much love at all. So if I only had attachment for Lou, I'd eat him up for breakfast and spit out the bones and go to the next boy. I'd leave him for dead because there's no love there. Love is our saving grace. Love and compassion, we all have it, but it's polluted, it's dragged down by attachment. So this is the really quite unique way, clear distinction. And there's a while that takes us to see the difference in our mind, because for us, they come together. We only love those we're attached to, and we're only attached to those we love. So we don't distinguish between them. But when we start to do this, it's a revelation. And that's when, if we're going to work on our minds, and I've got to work on my mind in my relationship to Lou, and not always expecting to do everything I want, is so self-centered. And you've got to practice that, because it's very scary to give up attachment. And when you give up attachment, you love even more. When you give up attachment, you don't give up Lou. If I give up attachment, that's the personal, self-centered, neurotic part of me, then I end up with more love, more empathy, more clarity, more kindness, but also more self-confidence, more self-respect, more contentment. This is the Buddhist way of describing these states of mind. So to see the difference between them is like so difficult, huge. And attachment is such a junkie. It's so manipulative. It's so sneaky. It's like a honey-covered razor blade, It appears like love. We can see this with our poor old mums. I mean, mums are a good example, not being mean about our mums. They're just naked with their attachment, their ownership of us, their possessiveness of us. And of course, in our world, we actually think we created that child, don't we? Even not for the Buddha. You give them a body, that's about it. They bring their own mind with them. But we can see it when your mum's really, really attached. She's lonely. You don't come and see me enough. You don't ever do it. She always sees it like that. And so, of course, we have all this guilt and neurotic to try to make mum happy. But the more you can't satisfy attachment, though. You could lie in bed with her every day and let her drink your blood. She still won't be happy. So you've got to recognize that. And it's very hard. You can't make people happy when there's attachment. They suffer because of their attachment, not because of you not satisfying their needs. It's a very tricky one. So it's a minefield to really know our minds well, and distinguishing in our relationships between attachment and love is a huge practice. And this is a powerful example, Are we communicating, people? 10 more minutes, so ask me some questions now. This is the main problem for most of us. This is the main practice, to distinguish between attachment and love. It's huge, absolutely huge. When we can do it, that's when we really start to grow up, become wise and more content, and therefore a better friend to Lou, Any more questions? Any questions at all about this?
I had a question, Venerable Robina. This is again.
Who's talking?
Elizabeth.
Good, Elizabeth, talk to me, darling.
I really like the distinction, and the distinction between love and attachment has been very, very helpful for me. with relationships in my family.
Good.
And you mentioned earlier schizophrenia and bipolar.
I use,
and I
yeah, I
was
said
just-
those words casually. Yeah, go on. But go on.
Well, I was just wondering, like, what the Buddhist thought is around mental illness.
I
Is
understand.
it-
I understand. I understand. It's a this is when I say we're all bipolar, we're all schizophrenic, we're all crazy. It's just a question of degree. I'm actually seriously saying that. So it's just a question of degree. So in our culture, because what we call normal in our culture is a normal person has attachment, depression, anger, jealousy, right? You get my point here. We factor that in as a normal part of a normal person. And what we mean by that is you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. Now, Buddha's just more dramatic, more radical. He has got a view that says we can get rid of these altogether. That's quite a shocking concept in the West. It sounds really peculiar. So then really that's what Buddha means by what suffering is. Ordinary people, ordinary attachment. You don't have to be a junkie to have attachment. That's just in our culture. When you're a junkie for alcohol, you want to jump on 20 boys a day. You lie all the, I mean, we call it differently, but if you're addicted to a certain behavior pattern that's destructive, that really is what Buddha says we're all like to some degree or other. It's a question of degree and it's a question of the object. In our culture, it's usually when it's a heavy object like alcohol, heroin, or now we're recognizing addiction to sex, addiction to hoarding, addiction to eating food. They're all just a variation. The object might be different, but the drive is attachment. Why a person hoards is attachment to not wanting to give things away, attachment to getting things. Why a person eats, whether you're bulimic or anorexic, it comes down, I'm not trying to simplify it, it comes down to incredible attachment, both to food and to the body. We've all got attachment to the body is one of the most intense one everybody has. There's not a human on the planet that I've ever met that doesn't think their body's the right shape, the right size, the right color. And it happens to be extreme if you're anorexic or bulimic. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's variations of attachment. And attachment is multifaceted in its function and in terms of its object. You can be attached to anything. So in that sense, to the degree that we ever have any attachment, any emotional hunger, any over-exaggeration of the deliciousness of anything is the degree to which we are, if you like, a junkie. But Buddha doesn't use that word. We use that word. Are you communicating with me? That's what Buddha
that makes
So then mental, okay, but more than that now. Then you've got people who are got serious attachment problems like alcoholic, heroin addicts, stealing, lying. We wouldn't call stealing a mental illness. We just call that a crime. But it's the same problem. It's attachment. One of my friends in prison on death row in Kentucky, who's a friend of my friend who's a Buddhist there, he says to me, my Buddhist friend, he said, Robina, he thinks of torture all the time. So, this is where we have to factor in karma now, Elizabeth, which of course is the unique Buddhist view, that we come into this life programmed with our different tendencies. So he didn't know since he's a little boy why he wanted to torture creatures, but you could argue that he's addicted to torture. He's a little pedophile. A pedophile is addicted to jumping on little girls. And one of the signs of attachment is you can't stop thinking about the object. That we absolutely recognize. We would call that obsessive compulsive. That's another variation of attachment. ADHD is another variation of the very berserk mind uncontrolled. I mean, I'm not trying to simplify it by narrowing it all down to attachment and aversion, but this is the Buddhist analysis. And when you know it deeply, it can cover all those things. Now, some people are deeply mentally disturbed, living in hallucinations, completely insane. That's their delusions plus some strong past karmic imprints. Also, so there's just a degree of mental illness. Sometimes some people, like Lou's example, how do you help a person with their attachments? If they're fairly reasonable, at some point they'll be open to advice. But some people, their delusions are so strong. My friend on death row who thinks of torture all the time, he's not stupid. He knows it's not acceptable. That's why he's on death row. But he can't stop it because the addiction is so intense. This is how addictions work, which is attachment. It's attachment. It's attachment. It's attachment. But some are seriously mentally ill, and the best we can do is love them and support them and keep and protect them from harming others. I mean, I'm not glad this guy's on death row, but I'm at least glad he's not out there torturing people. He's being protected from that. Are you with me?
Yeah,
So yeah, of
that
course.
helps.
I mean, even now, like I remember Yangtze Rinpoche, the Lama in Portland, at our Maitripa College. I mean, these Lamas use these Western terms now, like bipolar. So what's bipolar? I mean, I've got to close my window. Hang on, I'm shouting here. I had to put soundproofing in my room because I shout so loud, you know. At night, there's a security guy before, because this is an office, right? He's wondering what's going on. I mean, I've got soundproofing on my door, soundproofing on the wall. I've got my window open. I better close the window. Hang on a cheek. Wait a second. It's an old adobe building. The walls are about that thick. It's very wonderful. It's nice and quiet. Anyway, what was I saying? What was I about to say? I forget.
They're using the term of bipolar now.
Oh yeah, the Lamas. That's right. So let's analyze bipolar. Well, I'll tell you my own experience. I mean, I talk about this sometimes. I mentioned when there were 7 of us in our family. We're all very volatile. We're all very speedy. We all got busy minds, you know, me and my siblings, 7 of us. And anyway, at some point in the 60s, I had gone to London. I was being a raging hippie in London in the late 60s. 3 of my sisters had complete mental breakdown. So my mother was busy trying to take care of them all, you know. So she found this wonderful, she was, you know, did the typical one back in those days of electrical treatment and all that. And then she found this wonderful doctor, very kind psychiatrist, who diagnosed them as manic depressive. That was the term they used then. And so was giving them lithium. He was a very lovely human being, a very dear man. So my mother decided that all 7 of us should have a consultation with this psychiatrist, right? So I was in London raging on, being a hippie or a radical lefty. I forget what I was doing at the time. Maybe no, I was a feminist at that point, really serious feminist with my own very serious political view. And I did what my mother said when I went home to Melbourne, but I had no interest in this ridiculous male medicine and this stupid guy and his big ideas. I had no interest. But he also diagnosed me as manic depressive. But I remember thinking, you know, well, you and your medicine, I couldn't care less. If I'm crazy, I can handle it. I think I've told this story before. And luckily, I mean, I figured if I've got a crazy mind, I can handle my crazy mind. And that's something for me I found over the years. Some people who've been, we treat these labels very concretely because we're talking about the brain, you know, that, you know, some person I know, she was called bipolar, whatever, and she was depressed about it the whole time. And when she was shocked when she discovered that 40 years ago, 45, 50 years ago, I'd been diagnosed as something, but I thought, it's okay, it's just my mind. I mean, now I've got to the Buddhist view of the mind, it's far more flexible, much more potential to do something with your mind. And I mean, so my mind is crazy, but don't be scared of it, you know, don't be scared of our mind. And if I take the Buddhist view now, attachment, aversion, and this model makes complete sense to me. It helps me understand my mind. It helps me know I can change my mind, because the miracle of the Buddhist view is we're not set in stone. And this is what is marvelous now. I mean, one Canadian scientist said it's the greatest finding of the 20th century that we're not stuck with the brain we're born with. We've now discovered neuroplasticity. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but Buddha's been telling us for 2,500 years we're not stuck with the damn mind we're born with. And I've just always intuitively known that. So I haven't been afraid of my crazy mind. And then you can channel and use your crazy mind. Do you understand?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
I'm talking a lot here, but blah, 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 you know. I mean, nothing wrong with the Western models. I'm trying to be insulting. But, you know, sometimes with children, don't get me started with kids. I mean, one example I know, in all these kids who are called autistic, you know, who are super intelligent and would appear they're not very socially developed. But frankly, when you're an advanced person, you don't need to rely on people liking you all day. You see, one of the deepest attachments we have, the most primordial attachment, the hardest to see, more than for food, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and everything else. We don't even hear about it until we get to the Mahayana path and they tell us about the 8 worldly dharmas. This is a much more primordial level of attachment, and the deepest one. And that is the attachment to being seen as a good person. We need, since we're born, this is the irony of ego in Buddhism, that the sense of a separate self already is setting us up to feel dissatisfied. So therefore we have to rely upon something out there, in particular, a person, to smile at us, to then make me feel, oh, wow, I must have said the right thing. Somebody approves. This is our deepest attachment of all, the most primordial and the hardest to recognize. So this one, I mean, this is unbelievably powerful, this attachment, unbelievably powerful. There was a reason I was going to discuss this one. What I said just before? What did I say just before? I forget why I brought up this attachment. What was I talking just before this one?
Well, kids that were autistic and
Okay, good. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so now, one of the characteristics of people who are called autistic, and the trouble is that label is used for such a broad spectrum of people, from the genuinely seriously mentally ill to a person who's super intelligent, very independent, and doesn't particularly care if people like them. We call that a mental illness in our culture. It happens to be that maybe they're very content in who they are because they're born from practicing in the past and they don't have much attachment to being seen as a nice person. Well, there's this friend of mine who's a Buddhist, a student of Lama Zopa. And her little boy, when he was about 3, he displayed all the qualities of what they called autistic, high functioning, super intelligent, you know, all the labels. He'd have all the labels, ADHD, OCD, you name it. But she was worried about him because he's up at 5 in the morning, all day doing things in bed at night, and super busy, super intelligent, super kind of like volatile. She was really worried. And I said, for God's sake, you know, because she's a Buddhist, a student of Lama Zopa's, tell Lama Zopa about him. So he met Lama Zopa, seeing the little boy's mind, gave him all these practices, mantras to memorize, memorize the Heart Sutra, memorize this, and he did it all automatically. And then I said to this person, I said, why don't you send a photo to a Tibetan doctor? Because these Tibetan doctors are amazing. They're lamas, they're yogis, many of them, they're clairvoyant and everything. And so she sent a picture of the boy to this Tibetan doctor that I know, and just gave a few of his symptoms. And he wrote back and said, yes, that's how yogis behave. That was it. So it's so wicked in the West. I'm just so astonished that the poor children, every second kid is called OCD, ADHD, this, that, and given these bloody drugs, you know. It's so shocking. We've got, I mean, in my opinion, I'm not trying to sound like Tom Cruise, you know, anti-psychiatry. Not that. It's just we have a very narrow view based on fear. We can't stand anybody who doesn't fit in the little box, you know. So, I mean, it's so shocking because there's another person I know who's got the aspect of being very quiet. So she seems antisocial, but she's been recognized as a reincarnated Lama, which means she's fully developed in her own little mind. She has no interest in whether people like her. She's not like a typical little girl, a typical 2 little girls working or 2 little boys. They're all needy with each other. Then one says the wrong word, then they burst into tears and have a fight. And that's called normal. No, that's called mental illness for the Buddha. That's called attachment and aversion. If you don't have attachment, you don't need to be this way. You're relaxed in yourself. But we don't understand that. We think a normal person has to have a lot of neuroses and attachment. I mean, it's a very shocking concept, in my opinion. Just chatting here. Okay, giving my views, okay? It's time to go home as well. It's 8:30. That was a long answer to your question, Elizabeth.
it was a wonderful answer.
We've got to
thank
know
you
where
so
we're
much.
at. We've got to recognize our own mind, know it's not set in stone. And there are some people, of course, who are seriously mentally ill. And there's another whole level of that too, which we can maybe talk about another day. But then we have to love them and protect them from themselves and look after them and be kind, because some people cannot do the job on themselves. Not possible. So much suffering. There's no doubt about that. Okay, you people. That's enough for today. Okay. And we'll sing the little prayer that just says, may Miss Bodhichitta, this amazing love and compassion, may it grow and grow in the hearts of all. Jangchob, Semchog Rinpoche, Ma ke Panam ke Gyuchig, ke pa Nyampa me pa yang, gong ne gong du pelba shog. That'll do. Thank you, darlings. I'll try and Elizabeth, try and remember what I talked about today so I can remember for next week. Okay.
We'll be ready.
Oh, what's this? Oh, we did it. We just did the prayer. We've done it already. We've done it. Forget it. Okay. Much love, everybody. Thank you. Good to meet you, Lou. Thank you for inviting us, Addie.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
You all,
Thank
darling.
you so much.
Thank
Never
you
give
so
up.
much.
Okay. Bye, sweethearts.
Bye.
Bye, darlings.
Elizabeth.